to Elastic Beanstalk, and it will just work. This is called a Platform as a Service, or a PaaS. This manages the infrastructure and the software for us. If you want to learn more about these concepts, you can check out my backend overview video in the description. Now that we have an overview of AWS and some of the services we can use, let's learn how to use Elastic Beanstalk. Now, Amazon might change the design of these pages in the future. If you run into any issues, make sure to check the AWS troubleshooting guide in the description. We're going to start by creating an application, or we can click here, click Environments, and Create Environment. And on this page, we're going to select a web server environment, and we're going to give a name to our application. So let's just use e-commerce-project-react. And we can use the default values for this section. And we'll scroll down. And for the platform section, we're going to choose the technology we want to use here. For us, we're going to use Node.js. And down here, we'll just use the sample application. We can upload our own code later. And we'll scroll down. And here, we'll choose single instance. If you see free tier eligible, pick that one. Otherwise, just pick the single instance. And then here we'll click Next. And here we need to create a role. A role gives Elastic Beanstalk permission to use other services in AWS. So in here, if you already have a role for Elastic Beanstalk, you can use that. Otherwise, we'll click Create Role. And we should be able to use the default values that they set here. And we'll click Next. And then click Next. And at the bottom, we'll click Create Role. And then we'll go back to Elastic Beanstalk. And we'll click this button to refresh. And we'll select the role that we just created. For this one, we also need to create a role. So we'll click here. And then we can also use the default values that it gives. Click Next. And Next. And at the bottom, Create Role. And we'll go back and refresh and select the role that we just created. And we can keep this as blank. And we'll click Next. For the networking and database settings, we can just use the default values here. So we'll scroll down and click Next. And for the instance settings, we're going to scroll down and find the section called Capacity. And down here, we're going to scroll down. And we're going to find a section like this called Instance Types. And it has a drop down here. So this lets us choose the size of the computer that we want to rent from EC2. So in the description, we're going to click this link and go to lesson 10, and then follow the instructions here to select the correct instance types. So now we'll scroll down and click Next. And we can leave monitoring and logging settings as the default. So we'll scroll down and click Next. And finally, we'll scroll to the bottom and click Create. So now, Elastic Beanstalk is going to rent a computer for us using EC2. It will also install all the software that we need on this computer, like Node.js and NPM, and it will do all the configuration to connect this computer to the internet. So this will take a few minutes to complete. So we need to wait for this to finish. And you might need to refresh the page to check the progress. Once that's done, it should look something like this. And we can click this URL here or click here to open this website. And now we should see a sample Node.js application on this page. If something goes wrong and this doesn't work, please check the AWS troubleshooting guide in the description. Now that we set up Elastic Beanstalk, we're ready to put our code on the internet. We'll go back to Elastic Beanstalk, and our code has two parts, the backend and the frontend. We put the backend on the internet first, and then we put the frontend. To put the backend on the internet, we just need to upload our backend code to Elastic Beanstalk. So we'll click Upload and Deploy. And here, we're going to upload our backend code. However, we need to upload the code as a zip file. So we'll go back to VS Code, and I'll collapse this for now. And I actually set up the e-commerce backend so that it works with Elastic Beanstalk. So this backend has a command that will save all the code in a zip file. So we're going to go to the command line, and we're going to create a new tab. And in here, we're going to cd into e-commerce backend, and we'll run the command npm run zip. So this will save all the backend code into a zip file, which is right here. If I open this zip file, you'll see that it just contains all of the backend code. So now we just need to upload this zip file to Elastic Beanstalk. We'll go back to the browser, and we'll click this to choose a file. And for me, my code is on the desktop, inside the React course folder, inside e-commerce backend. And if I scroll down, I'll see this e-commerce backend 1, which is a zip file. So I'll click this and open, wait for it to upload, and then click deploy. So now Elastic Beanstalk will take the backend code and put it on the internet. So we'll wait for a few minutes for this to complete. Once that's done, we're going to click this URL again. And now, instead of the sample application, it should say index not found, which is normal. This is how I designed my backend. Now, in the URL, we're going to click up here and go to the end. We're going to enter the URL path /API/products and press enter. So this will give us the products data that we were using in our project on our computer. So this is the same data that we saw before, except now our backend is on the internet. Now that our backend is on the internet, let's put our front end on the internet as well. For the front end, we also need to prepare our code. So we'll go back to VS Code, and I'll collapse this folder for now. And if we look at the front end code, notice that in here, we use .jsx code. However, remember that the browser does not understand JSX. It only understands normal JavaScript. So we need to convert this code into normal JavaScript first. To do that, Vite has a command for this. Inside the command line, we'll create a new tab, and this time we'll cd into e-commerce-project. And Vite has a command called npm run build. This is a shortcut for Vite build. So we'll press enter. And this basically converts all of our JSX code into normal JavaScript and saves the code in a folder called dist. So inside here, we have an index.html file, and this is the HTML for our React website. And inside the assets folder, we have this JavaScript file. So this is all of our React code, but converted into normal JavaScript. You'll also notice that Vite combined all of our code into one file, and it also minified or compressed the code. So it shortened the variable names and removed the extra spaces. This is because when we open a website, our browser needs to download all the front-end code and run it. By combining and compressing the code, it makes our website load faster. And Vite did the same thing with the CSS. You can see that it combined all of our CSS files together and compressed it. So now our front end is optimized and it's ready to be put on the internet. So now when we open a website, we need to download this React code from somewhere. So where do we put this front end code? So we could put this in another service like GitHub Pages, and then when we visit the website, our browser will download this front end code from there. However, notice in our current setup that we already have this backend computer that's running in Elastic Beanstalk. So we can just reuse this backend computer. We can put our React code into the backend computer, and our browser will download the React code from the backend computer. So this is a common setup, and it simplifies our setup because now we only need to set up one computer. So to do this step, all we need to do is to take this dist folder and then drag it into the e-commerce backend like this. And I added some code in the e-commerce backend so that it works with this dist folder. So now in the command line, we'll go back to the tab that's running in the backend, and we're going to create the zip file again. So we'll do npm run zip. So this will create another zip file, but with our front-end code inside. And now we just need to upload this to Elastic Beanstalk. We'll go back to the browser and open Elastic Beanstalk, and we'll click Upload and Deploy. And we'll choose a file, and this time we'll choose the second file here. And click Deploy. And we'll wait a few minutes for this to complete. Once that's finished, we're going to click this URL again. And now we should have our React app on the internet. So let's try adding some stuff to the cart to make sure it works. I'll add a toaster and 2 plates. And now if I look at the cart, it updated. If I open it, we have our new products in the cart, and we can update them like usual. And if we click Create Order, it works. So everything is working the same as on our computer, but this React app is now on the internet. If we go back to the home page, I'm going to give you an overview of how this works. So visually, this is what's happening. First, we put our backend on the internet, so the backend is running on a separate computer, and then we put our front-end code in the backend computer. And I set up some code in the backend so that when we visit the website using the URL path /, the backend sends back the React code to our computer. So now we have the React code running on our computer, and it communicates with the backend running on another computer. So this is how a real-world React app works. When we're developing, the front end and the back end run on the same computer because it's easier for development. But when we put the React app on the internet, the front end code runs on our computer and the back end code runs on another computer. Next, we can add a shortcut to Vite to make this process a little easier. We'll go back to VS Code, and we'll go to the e-commerce project folder, which is here. So remember that we created a dist folder and then manually dragged it into e-commerce backend. We can configure Vite to put the dist folder in e-commerce backend directly. we're going to scroll down to vite.config.js. And in this configuration, at the bottom, we're going to add a property called build, colon, curly brackets. And in here, we'll use a property out, capital D, dir, colon, and a string. So this tells Vite where to put the dist folder. So we want to put it inside the e-commerce backend folder. So we'll give it .. to go out of e-commerce project and then into e-commerce -backend/dist and save. So now if we go into the backend and we right click and delete this dist folder and then run npm run build, so in the command line, we'll open the tab that's running in the e-commerce project and then run npm run build and press enter. It will create the dist folder directly in here, so directly in the e-commerce backend. So this just saves a step in our process. We can also automate this process further, but I'll leave that as an exercise. So now we'll save this change into Git. We'll go to the Git section and we'll use the message save build result in e-commerce -backend and commit. Before we continue, I want to discuss how to deploy a React app without a backend. So notice that so far, to put a React app on the internet, we needed a backend. But what if we don't know how to write backend code yet? What if we just know React? So if a React app does not have a backend, we can actually just put the code on the internet directly. For example, in our code here, we're going to go back to our chatbot project from earlier. And notice that this project does not use a backend. It only has React code. So to deploy this project, we're going to use npm run build again. So in our command line, we'll create a new tab and we'll cd into the chatbot-project folder. And if we need to, we can npm install and then npm run build. And this will convert all the React code into normal JavaScript and save it in a dist folder again. So notice that inside the dist folder, we actually just have normal HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So this is actually just an HTML website. And we can actually upload this code to any service that puts an HTML website on the internet. For example, here I use a service called GitHub Pages. And I can just upload this code to GitHub Pages and it will put it on the internet. No backend knowledge required. To learn more, you can actually follow the same steps as my video, how to put a HTML website on the internet. However, make sure you do the exercises in this lesson first, since there's still some small configuration changes that we need to make for this to work. So basically, if we just have a front end, we can just upload this code directly to the internet using something like GitHub Pages. But if our project has a backend as well, then we need to use a more complicated service like AWS to put the backend and the front end on the internet. In the rest of this lesson, we're going to improve our AWS setup to make it more real-world and professional. So we'll go back to the browser and we'll open AWS again. And I'm actually going to close some of these other tabs because we don't need them. And inside Elastic Beanstalk, in this project, we're going to go to the configuration section. And we're going to scroll down and find the configuration for instance traffic. If you don't see this, you can check the AWS troubleshooting guide in the description. So here we'll click Edit And we're going to scroll until we find the capacity section. And here, we'll look for something like environment type and a dropdown that says single instance. So we're going to change this to load balanced. So what this does is it adds another computer in front of our backend computer. This is called a load balancer. So what a load balancer does is if we have a really busy website, one computer might not be enough to handle all the requests. So we can actually run the backend on multiple computers. And this load balancer will distribute the requests across these computers. This allows our website to handle much more users. So here, we can decide how many backend computers to run. Since we're just testing, we'll set this to a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 1. And then we'll scroll down and click Apply. And now Elastic Beanstalk will set up a load balancer computer in front of our backend. And this will take a few minutes to complete. After it finishes, we're going to go back to the configuration again. And we'll scroll down to the instance traffic settings and just make sure that min is 1 and max is 1. If it's not 1, we can click Edit and then scroll back down and then change it to 1. And we'll scroll down and click Apply again. So when that finishes, I'll just check it again. And now it's 1 and 1. So now our website setup looks like this. We have 3 computers, the front end, the back end, and the load balancer. This is closer to a real-world setup. Again, you can watch my video on backend overview to learn more about these concepts. Next, currently all the data for our React app, like the products, the cart, and the orders, are saved in a database, and the database is saved in a file. However, when we put our React app on the internet, we usually put the database on a separate computer. And this lets us share the data between backend computers. So inside AWS, we're going to go to the configuration again, and we'll scroll down to the database configuration, and we'll click Edit. And inside the database section, we're going to scroll down and find Database, and we'll click Enable Database. Elastic Beanstalk will automatically create a new computer that's running a database, and it will connect this database to our backend. So we'll scroll down and look at these options. And here we can select the database that we want to use. So the e-commerce backend works with the database MySQL. So we're going to use that. And then here, we're going to look at the instance class setting. So this is the size of the computer running the database. In the description, we'll click this link, go to lesson 10, and then here, we'll follow the instructions to select the correct instance class for the database. And finally, we'll set a password. And now we'll scroll down to the bottom and click Apply. So AWS will set up a separate computer to run the database. And I already added some code in my e-commerce backend to connect to this database. So it should just work. If you have issues, please check the AWS troubleshooting guide. After that finishes, we can open the website again. And it still works. If we add something to the cart, notice that the database still works. And if we open the orders page, Remember that earlier I created a new order? And now the orders are back to the default values. So this means that we're using the new MySQL database that we set up. And now our AWS setup looks like this. We have a load balancer, a backend, and it connects to a database on another computer. And this is getting even closer to a real-world setup. Next, if we go back to AWS, notice that to open our website, we use this default URL, which is really long. So now we're going to set up a domain name to make our website easier to access. A domain name is like mywebsite.com or youtube.com. It's a short name that makes it easy to access our website. So instead of putting this long URL in the browser, we can just type mywebsite.com and it will open this website. So I'll show you how to set up a domain name with AWS. First, we need to purchase a domain name. Most domain names cost around $10 or $20 per year. So this section is optional. If you already have a domain name that you purchased before and you want to use, feel free to skip to the next section. Otherwise, I'm going to show you how to purchase your own domain name. There are many services we can use to purchase domain names. I use a service called Namecheap for all my websites, like supersimple.dev. In the description, we'll click this link, go to lesson 10, and click here to go to Namecheap. So this is an affiliate link. If you decide to purchase a domain name using this link, part of your purchase will help support this channel. Thank you so much. Once we're on Namecheap, we're going to search for a domain name that we want. If you see a search box here, you can search for it. Otherwise, we can go to Domains and Domain Name Search. And we'll scroll down here and search for a domain name. So domain names are unique. Once they are taken, like youtube.com, we can't purchase it anymore. If you don't know what domain name you want, my recommendation is to try to register your first and last name. This might be useful for a personal website. So for me, it's Simon Bao, and we need to give it an ending, like .com. .com stands for commercial. It's the most popular ending for domain names. Now, you could pick another ending that you want, but be careful because some domain endings don't work with normal browsers. If you're not sure which ending you want, I recommend using .com or .net, just to be safe, because they are the most popular. So now, I'm going to click Search to see if this domain has already been taken. So it looks like this one has already been taken. So I'll just add something to it, like Simon Bao Eng or engineer. And this one is available. So you might need to modify your domain name to find one that works for you. So we'll add this to the cart and then open the cart. If you want to auto-renew this domain name, you can click here, and then we'll click Confirm Order. And if you don't have a Namecheap account, you'll need to create an account first. And after filling out all the information, we'll purchase the domain. And that's it. Now we have a domain name and we own a little piece of the internet. Once we have a domain name, we're going to set up the domain name in AWS. So we'll go back to AWS, and at the top, we're going to search for the service Route 53. And we're going to right-click this and open in a new tab. So Route 53 lets us manage our domain names in AWS. We can click Get Started and click Create Hosted Zones, and then click Get Started. If you don't see that, we can also click this menu here, click Hosted Zones, and then click Create Hosted Zone. a hosted zone lets us connect a domain name to our app. So currently, a hosted zone costs about 1.6 cents per day. So you can use it for free for a few hours. So here, we're going to enter the domain name that we have. So for me, it's simonbaoeng.com. And scroll down, and we'll leave it as a public, and then click Create Hosted Zone. And now, inside here, we're going to scroll down and click Create Record. So this sets where the domain name will go. We're going to leave the subdomain as blank, and we'll create an A record, and we're going to check alias. And here, we can select which AWS service we want to connect to. So for us, we're using Elastic Beanstalk, and we're going to choose the region. If we go back to the tab that's running Elastic Beanstalk, we can see the region up here. So for me, I'm using the region Ohio. So I'll go back to Route 53, and I'll search for the region Ohio, and select it. And we should see our app here. So I'll select that. And then scroll down and click Create Records. And finally, we need to tell Namecheap, or the company that you use for your domain name, to redirect to AWS. So inside Namecheap, or your domain company, we're going to go to the settings, and we're going to find the domain. So in Namecheap, it's in domain list. And here, you may need to verify your email. So we'll click this and check your email for the verification. So this might take a while, so we just have to wait until the verification is complete. And we may need to log out and log back in to our Namecheap account for the verification to update. Once verification is complete, we should be able to go back to the domain list, find our domain, and open the settings for the domain. And in the settings, we're going to look for a section that's called Name Servers. If you're having trouble finding this in Namecheap or your domain company, please check the AWS troubleshooting guide in the description. And then in here, we're going to click this dropdown, and we're going to set custom DNS because we're going to use AWS for this. So now we need to enter some name servers. To find these, we're going to go back to AWS Route 53, and I need to zoom out a little bit to see this. Inside the hosted zone, we have some records here, and we're going to look for the record NS, or name server. So in the NS record, we should see these 4 URLs here. So we just need to copy these over to Namecheap, or your domain company. So we'll select this and copy. And then inside Namecheap, in here, we'll paste. And we'll go back and select the second name server, copy, and paste. If we need to, we can add 2 more name servers. In here, we'll select this and copy. And here, we'll paste. And we'll select the last one, copy, and here, paste, and then save. So what this does is when we open our domain name in the browser, Namecheap is going to redirect to AWS. And then AWS will redirect to Elastic Beanstalk, or to our app. So this setting will take a while to update. Sometimes it finishes in just 10 minutes, but it could take up to 24 to 48 hours. So we just have to be patient. So once we waited for a while, we can try opening a new tab. And in here, we'll type http:// and our domain name. So for me, it's simonbaoeng.com. and press enter. And this will redirect to our app. So now we're able to access our React app using a short domain name that's easy to remember. Next, I'm going to explain why we enter HTTP in front and why we see this not secure warning here. So this means that our website is not using encryption. This means that any data we send to this website can be intercepted by a hacker. To enable encryption on this website and make it secure, we need to set up an SSL certificate, which is a special file that enables encryption. To get an SSL certificate, we can use AWS. So we'll go back to AWS Route 53, and then at the top, we'll search for another service called Certificate Manager, and click here. And we can request a certificate. If you don't see it, you can also go in here and click Request Certificate. We'll use the default value and click Next. And here, we're going to enter our domain name. Make sure to enter your domain name. And we'll scroll down and make sure DNS validation is selected. And scroll down and click Request. And then we'll wait for this to finish loading. And now, AWS needs to confirm that we own the domain name. That's why it says pending validation. To do that, we can just click this Create Records in Route 53 button. If you don't see this, please check the AWS troubleshooting guide. And it should show up here, and we'll click Create Records. And we'll wait for this to finish. We may need to refresh a few times until it says it was successful. And now that we have an SSL certificate, we can use this in Elastic Beanstalk. So we'll go back to Elastic Beanstalk, and then in the configurations here, we're going to scroll down to the instance traffic settings and click Edit. And we're going to scroll down until we find this Listeners section. And here, we'll click Add Listener. For the port, we're going to use 443. And for the protocol, we're going to use HTTPS. HTTPS means we're going to have a secure connection to our website, and this usually uses port 443. And here, we're going to choose the SSL certificate that we just created. And we should be able to leave the SSL policy blank and click Save. If that didn't work, please check the AWS troubleshooting guide. So this basically adds an SSL certificate to the load balancer. And now any data sent to our website will be encrypted. So we're going to scroll down and click Apply. And again, this will take a few minutes to complete, so we just have to wait for it. Once that's complete, I'll close some of these other tabs, and I'll create a new tab. And in the URL, we're going to type https://. So this tells the browser to use the secure connection to our website. And then we'll type our domain name. For me, it's simonbaoeng.com and press enter. So now the not secure warning is gone, and we're using a secure connection to our website that uses encryption. Also, now, if we just type our domain name in the URL without HTTPS in front and press enter, it will default to using the secure version. So that's how we set up an SSL certificate and HTTPS in AWS. And now we have a professional and real-world setup for our React app. In this section, I'll show you how to delete everything we created in AWS. However, I recommend to do the exercises of this lesson first to get more practice with AWS and then do this deletion. Also, I try to keep everything we created in the free tier. The only exception is the hosted zone in Route 53. You can use it for free for a few hours. So you could keep running these services and practice AWS if you want. To check your AWS bill, we can go to the profile and click Billing and Cost Management. And now, after you finish the exercises, I'll show you how to delete everything just in case. So in Elastic Beanstalk, we can click this Actions dropdown and click Terminate Environment. And in here, we need to type the name of the environment, which is here, and click Terminate. Once that's finished, we can go up here and go to Route 53. And in this menu, we can go to Hosted Zones, and we'll open the hosted zone. And inside here, we're going to select the A record and the CNAME record and delete these records. And then at the top, we can delete the hosted zone. And in here, we'll type delete and click delete. Once that's finished, at the top, we'll go to Certificate Manager. And in this menu, we're going to click List Certificates. And we'll select this certificate and click Delete. Type delete and click delete. You can also delete your entire account if you want by clicking your profile and clicking account, and then close account. Although you'll lose access to the free tier if you do this. I usually keep my account open for a while to practice with the free tier. So now we put our React app on the internet and we created a professional real-world setup. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned AWS, or Amazon Web Services, which is a collection of services that help us put stuff on the internet. We learned EC2, which lets us rent a computer from AWS and is known as Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS. We learned Elastic Beanstalk, which manages EC2 and sets up all the software that we need. This is also known as a Platform as a Service, or PaaS. We put our backend on the internet. We learned how to build and optimize the front end and put it on the internet. We learned how to deploy React without a backend. We added a load balancer and database to create a more real-world setup. And we learned how to set up a domain name, SSL certificate, and HTTPS for our website. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn some of the updates in the new version of React, and we'll learn how to use TypeScript with React. On the React website, there's a page that lists the updates in the new version of React. You can find a link to this page in the description. So there's a lot of changes here, and many of these changes are related to using React in a framework, which is basically a layer on top of React. For now, I'm just going to go over the changes that are related to this course. The first change is called Support for Document Metadata. So this means that we can put elements that normally go inside the head section, like the title, link, and meta elements, directly inside our component, like this. So this lets us change the head section when we render this component. For example, in our project, we used a title element to change the text in the tab when we switch pages. The way this works is when this component renders, React will put this title inside the head section, and this will change the text in the tab. Before React 19, we had to use an NPM package like React Helmet to do this. After React 19, we can just put these elements directly in our components, so it's easier. Another change is called ref as a prop. Earlier in this course, we learned about refs, and we can use a ref to get access to an HTML element directly. We can also give a ref to a component. For example, if we want to get an HTML element inside this component. Before React 19, ref was a special prop. We can't access it inside this component. We had to use a feature called forward ref. After React 19, ref is now a normal prop. We can access it like any other prop, and we don't need to know about forward ref anymore, so it's easier. The next change is the introduction of the React compiler. The React compiler optimizes our React code. For example, let's say we had a component like this. We have a counter and two other components inside. When we click the counter, this element will update, but it will also recreate these other two components, even though clicking the counter does not affect the other two components. That's because by default, when a component updates, it will also update or recreate all the components inside. And this may cause performance issues. To avoid this issue, before React compiler, we had to use three features: use memo, use callback, and memo. And this prevents a component from being recreated unless one of the props changed. So don't worry if you don't understand this code, because after the React compiler, the compiler will just add these optimizations automatically. And now we can just write our code as normal, and we don't need to worry about use memo, use callback, or memo anymore in most cases. So again, the React compiler optimizes our React code. All we have to do is to set up the React compiler, and we will get these optimizations. We don't have to change any of our code. Now let's learn how to set up the React compiler in our project. In the description, we'll click this link, go to lesson 11, and here we have the instructions for setting up the React compiler. I put the setup instructions here because this process might change in the future, and it's not easy to update the video. So follow the instructions that you see on your page. For me, the first step is to install the React compiler npm package. So I'm going to select this command and copy it. And then in my project, I'm going to go to the command line and create a new tab. And I'll close these other tabs so that I can start fresh. And first, I need to make sure I'm running inside ecommerce-project. So I'll cd ecommerce-project. And then I'll paste the command and press enter to install the React compiler npm package. And then I'll go back. And the next instruction is to copy this React config. So I'll select this config and copy it. And then I need to update vite.config.js and put that React config in here. So I'll go to the project and open vite.config.js. And at the top, I see this React config. So I'm just going to replace it and paste and save. And that's the setup. Again, the instructions might be different when you watch this video, so follow the instructions on your page. Next, let's check if the React compiler is working. So we'll go back to the instructions. And down here, we have some instructions for checking if React compiler is working. Again, follow the instructions on your page because they might have changed. So first, I'll start the backend and the frontend using npm run dev. I'll go back to VS Code, and in the command line, I'll create a new tab, and I'm going to go into the backend folder using cd ecommerce-backend and run npm run dev. And I'll go to the frontend tab, and I'll also run npm run dev. So now both of them are running. I'll go back to the instructions. And the next step is to install the React DevTools Chrome extension. So we'll click here. So this is an extension made specifically for React. It has a bunch of features that help us with React development. So here, we're going to add this extension to our browser. And once that's finished, I'll go back to the instructions. And the next step is, in your project, open the console and open the Components tab. So in VS Code, we're going to open this project in the browser. And I'm going to right-click and inspect. And in the console, we're going to click here, and we should have a new Components tab. So we'll click this. If it gets stuck, you can refresh. And this shows us all the React components that are on our page. If we scroll down, and if we look at our components, they should have a badge beside them called Memo. This means that the React compiler is working, and it's optimizing our React components. Now let's go back and look at some more changes in the new version of React. The next change is removed prop types and default props. So prop types were an older feature of React. It basically lets us check the type of a prop. For example, here we can check if the prop text is a string. If we run this app and text is not a string, it would show a warning in the console. So now we use a different tool called TypeScript, which is better at this type of type checking. So React removed the prop types feature in favor of TypeScript. React also removed default props. If a prop is undefined, this feature lets us set a default value. So now we can do this with normal JavaScript. So we don't need this React feature anymore. Now that we learned that prop types was replaced by TypeScript, let's learn how to set up TypeScript with React. We'll go back to VS Code. And to set up TypeScript with React, we can use the create vite command. So in the command line, we'll create a new tab and make sure this is running in the React course folder. And we're going to run the command npx create-vite. And we'll type @ to give it a specific version. And we'll click this link in the description, go to lesson 11, and we'll use this version of Vite. So copy the version that you see on your page, and in here we'll paste and press enter. If it asks to install the package, press Y and press enter. And as a review, Create Vite creates a new project. So let's name this project ecommerce-project-ts or TypeScript and press enter. For the framework, we're going to press down and choose React. And for the variant, we're going to choose TypeScript. So this will create a new React project that uses TypeScript. If we look at the code inside source, notice that it uses TSX files instead of JSX. TSX means this code uses TypeScript, while JSX means it uses JavaScript. So now to run this project, we're going to follow the instructions that we see. So for me, I'll cd into ecommerce-project-ts and run npm install to install all the packages that we need. And then I'm going to open the tab that's running the front end, and I'll press Ctrl+C to stop the front end so we don't have any issues. And then in the TypeScript tab, we're going to run npm run dev to start this project. And now we'll open this in the browser. So I already have it open. So I'm going to go in here and open this tab and refresh. Now we have a new React project, but this project uses TypeScript instead of JavaScript. And now I'll give you an intro to TypeScript. Let's go back to our code. And inside the TypeScript project, we're going to open app.tsx. So first of all, what is TypeScript? TypeScript is just JavaScript with extra features. So notice that this TypeScript code is the same as JavaScript code. The syntax is the same, and the features are the same. For example, in here, in TypeScript, we can create a variable the same way as JavaScript using const message equals the string hello. And then we can console.log message. So as you can see, TypeScript is just JavaScript. However, TypeScript gives us some extra features on top of JavaScript. The main feature is we can add types to our variables. So what are types? Remember that JavaScript has different types of values, like numbers, strings, and objects. In TypeScript, we can set what type of value is inside a variable. For example, in this variable, we have a string. So after the variable name, we can type colon, space, and string. So this tells TypeScript that this variable contains a string. So now below this, if I type message and then dot, TypeScript knows that this is a string. So now it's able to suggest all the features of a string, like to lowercase and brackets. So using TypeScript, our computer can give us better autocomplete suggestions. Next, if I type message dot to fixed and brackets, to fixed only works with numbers. Because TypeScript knows that this is a string, it's going to give us an error saying that to fixed does not work on strings. So this feature is called type checking. TypeScript checks if this code works with this type of value, and this helps us avoid errors. In JavaScript, there is no type checking. So if I want to put this code on my website, JavaScript will just let me do it, and it will crash my website. But in TypeScript, if I want to put this code on my website, I would save this code, and then in my command line, press Ctrl+C to stop the server, and run npm run build. Notice that TypeScript actually blocks us from building this code and putting it on our website because there's an error with the types. So as you can see, TypeScript gives us type checking, which helps us avoid a lot of these coding errors and helps us keep our code safer. Another feature of TypeScript is type inference. Type inference means TypeScript can figure out the type automatically. For example, in this code, this variable obviously contains a string. So we actually don't need to set the type manually here. If we delete this type, TypeScript will infer or figure out that this is a string. So I can remove it and save, and the error check still works because TypeScript knows that this is a string. Another example of type inference is up here in useState. So this count variable contains the number 0. TypeScript will infer or figure out that count is a number. So if we do count.toLowerCase and brackets, it's going to give us an error because toLowerCase only works with strings, and TypeScript figured out that this is a number. So as you can see, TypeScript is just JavaScript, but it adds extra features like type checking and type inference to our code. And this helps us find and avoid errors. So now let's save this code, and we'll save these changes into Git. In the Git section, at the top, we're going to use the message create new React TypeScript project and press commit. So we just learned how to create a new React project that uses TypeScript. Now let's learn how to convert an existing project, like our e-commerce project, to TypeScript. To do that, we're just going to move all of our changes over to the new TypeScript project. Before we begin, if you have any issues during this process, please check the troubleshooting guide in the description, since things might change depending on the version of Vite. To make this easier, in the e-commerce project, we're going to delete the node modules folder for now. And then we'll make a copy of this folder. So we'll right-click, copy, and we'll collapse these folders and click the outside and right-click and paste. So this just helps us keep track of progress when we're moving the changes over. So we're going to start from top to bottom. First, we'll look at the public folder. So in here, the change we made is we added this images folder. So we're going to take the public folder and we're going to drag it to the TypeScript project. And click Move and click Replace. Next, let's go into the source folder and we're going to move our changes over one by one. So first, in the assets folder, we didn't make any changes to this folder, so we're not going to move it over, and we can just delete this folder. As a reminder, we're not trying to move all of our code over. We want to start from a default TypeScript project and then only move our changes over to the new project. So let's continue and look at the components folder. So this folder is completely new. So we're going to move this entire folder over to the TypeScript project inside the source folder. And click Move. And if it asks to update the imports, we're going to click No, because we're going to move everything over. Next, we're going to go back up, and the pages folder is new. So we're going to drag this folder into the TypeScript project inside source. And click Move. And update the imports, click No. Next, we'll scroll up, and the utils folder is new. So we're going to select this folder and drag it into the TypeScript folder inside source. So move and click No. And next, we'll keep going one by one. For app.css, we made it empty. So we're going to move this over. So drag it into source, click Move, and click Replace. And scroll back up. For app.jsx, we made a bunch of changes in here. So we're going to move this over. So drag it into source. and click Move. However, notice in the TypeScript project, the file is called app.tsx. So we're going to replace this code with our file. So first, we're going to select this and delete app.tsx. And then we'll right-click app.jsx and rename it to tsx. Now we'll scroll back up and continue moving our changes. So index.css, we completely changed this file. So we're going to move it into the TypeScript project, into source, click Move, and click Replace. And scroll back up. And finally, in main.jsx, we just added the router. So let's move this file as well. We'll select it and drag it into source and move. And again, in TypeScript, the file is called main.tsx. We'll select it and delete. And we're going to rename our file. Right-click, rename, main.tsx, and press Enter. Update the imports, select No. We'll scroll back up, and we moved all of the code from the source folder, so we can delete it. Next, we don't need to move the starting code folder because this was just for practice when we were setting up this project. So we can just delete this folder. Now let's move all the files over to the TypeScript project. So in git ignore, we didn't make any changes to this file, so we don't need to move it over, and we can delete it. In eslint.config.js, we added one change to this file at the bottom, which is we added this rule to disable prop types. So we'll select this code and copy. And in the TypeScript project, we're going to open eslint.config. And at the bottom, in this rules object, we're going to paste and move that change over and save. So again, we don't want to move all of our code over. We just want to move the changes over because a lot of this code is specific to TypeScript. So we'll scroll back up here and we can delete this file because we moved it over. Next, let's keep going in here. For index.html, we changed a few parts of this code. So we're going to move these changes over. To help us compare this code with the TypeScript version, I'm going to scroll down and take this index.html and then move it at the bottom here so that I can compare these side by side. So first, the first 3 lines here, we did not make any changes, so we can skip them. And then here, the next 3 lines, we also did not make any changes, so we can skip them. And here, we added a base element. So we're going to select this and copy. And in the TypeScript version, we're going to paste that change. And here, we also deleted the title. So in the TypeScript version, we're also going to delete the title. And here, we added a font called Roboto. So we're going to move this change by selecting it and copy. And in here, we'll paste the font. And if we need to fix the formatting, we can select this and press Shift-Tab to remove some indents. And I'll scroll down. And for the rest of the code, we did not make any changes. So now we moved all the changes over. I'm going to save this file and close this for now. And then in the copy, we can delete index.html. And next, we don't need to move package.lock.json over because this will be auto-generated when we npm install. So we can just delete this file. And I'll scroll back up. And we'll move over package.json. In this file, we didn't change anything at the top, but we did add some dependencies and dev dependencies. So we're going to move these over. We'll select the dependencies and copy. And then in the TypeScript project, open package.json. And in these dependencies, we'll type comma and paste. And then we'll remove any duplicates. So we'll remove React and React DOM and save. And we'll scroll back up and open package.json. And we'll do the same thing with the dev dependencies. So we'll select all these dependencies and copy. And in the TypeScript project, package.json, in the dev dependencies, at the bottom, we'll type comma and paste. And we'll remove all these duplicates. So I'll remove ESLint, and I'll remove these duplicates, and these duplicates, and these duplicates, and remove this until there are no more duplicates remaining. And now we'll save, and then we're going to run npm install to make sure we successfully install all these packages. In the command line, we'll go to the tab for the TypeScript project, and we'll run npm install. And now we can scroll up and delete package.json. And we'll keep going. For readme.md, we didn't change this file, so we can delete it. And this file, setuptests.js, is new. So we'll move this over to the TypeScript project. And we'll scroll up. And we're going to move over vite.config.js. So in here, we added a bunch of configurations. So in the TypeScript project, we're going to drag vite.config.ts at the bottom. And we're going to move our changes over. So inside the config, we added some stuff for the React config. So we're going to select this React config and copy, and then select this code, remove it, and paste. And we'll keep going. So all of these configs are new. So we can just select this code, and then copy, and inside the TypeScript version, we're going to paste and save. So now we moved all of our changes over to the new project, and we can delete this file. And I'll close this for now. And finally, vtest.config.js is new. So we can drag it into the project. And now we moved all of our changes over into the TypeScript project, and I can delete this copy. Next, we're going to go into the TypeScript project, and we're going to fix the errors. First, we'll open main.tsx. And in here, instead of importing from app.jsx, the file is now app.tsx. So we're going to update that. Also, we have an error here. So this code tries to get an element from the page using the ID root. However, this element might not exist. So TypeScript gives us an error, telling us this value might be null. However, if we check our index.html and scroll down, we have an element here with the ID of root. So we know that this element definitely exists. In main.tsx, to tell TypeScript that this value definitely exists, at the end, we're going to add exclamation and save. So this tells TypeScript that this value definitely exists, and it will not be null. And now the error is gone. Next, we'll open app.tsx. And up here, we get some errors when we are trying to import these files. The reason we get these errors is because these files are still .jsx files or JavaScript files. So we could rename all of our files to .tsx, but then TypeScript will start doing type checking in these files, and we may get a bunch of errors. Instead, in our files, we can scroll down to tsconfig.app.json. And inside here, we're going to add a setting, double quotes, allow capital J S, colon, true, and comma, and save. So this setting lets us mix TypeScript and JavaScript files in our project. So now in app.tsx, our TypeScript code can also import from JavaScript files, and it won't cause an error. So the allow.js setting lets us gradually convert a JavaScript project to TypeScript, one file at a time. Now that we fixed the errors, let's run this project again to see if our e-commerce project works with TypeScript. In the command line, make sure you're in e-commerce project TS, and we're going to npm run dev and press enter. And now, if we open this URL in the browser and refresh, and now you can see that our e-commerce project is working with TypeScript. If we try some of the features, like add to cart, you'll see that everything still works. If this does not work for you, you can check the troubleshooting guide in the description. Now let's go back to our code, and let's rename our folders so that we use TypeScript by default. We're going to scroll up, and we're going to rename e-commerce project, right-click, rename to e-commerce project-js for JavaScript. And then we're going to rename e-commerce project-ts to e-commerce project. So now, by default, our project will be using TypeScript. And just to make sure, we're going to go to the command line and stop the Vite server, and we're going to delete all our tabs. So here we'll also Control-C to stop the backend and delete all the tabs. And then we'll reopen the command line using the terminal menu and new terminal. And we're going to restart the backend using cd e-commerce-backend npm run dev and create a new tab. And we'll run the front end, cd e-commerce-project and npm run dev. And in the browser, we'll refresh, and our TypeScript project still works. We'll go to VS Code, and finally, we're going to organize these folders a little bit. So right now, we're no longer using the e-commerce project JavaScript version or the React Basics folder. So let's click outside, and we'll click here to create a new folder, and let's call it old-projects. And then we'll drag the JavaScript version into here, and we'll move React Basics into here. So now our folders are a little bit more organized. So now let's save this into Git. We'll open the Git section, and at the top, we'll use the message convert e-commerce project to TypeScript and commit. Next, we're going to learn an intro to TypeScript with React. First, we'll go into our files, and in the project, we're going to go to source, the utils folder, and we're going to look at money.js. Currently, this is a JavaScript file. That means there is no type checking in this code. So we're going to convert this to TypeScript by right-clicking and rename, and we'll rename it to money.ts or TypeScript. So this converts the file into TypeScript, and now it will enable type checking. And now we will get an error here. So this error says amount sent implicitly has an any type. So what this means is that earlier we learned the feature type inference, which means TypeScript can figure out the type automatically. However, in this situation, TypeScript does not have enough information to figure out the type of amount sent. So we have to set the type manually. To set the type of a parameter, after this parameter, we're going to type colon, space, and then the type of this value. So in this case, amount sent should be a number. So we're going to type number and save. And now that TypeScript knows what type of value this is, the error will go away. And now we successfully converted this file to TypeScript. Let's do another example. We're going to go to the components folder, and we're going to convert header.jsx into TypeScript. So we're going to rename this file to header.tsx. So tsx is just a TypeScript file, but the x means we can write HTML inside this file. So it's just like JSX, except it uses TypeScript. So now this converts the file to TypeScript, and it enables type checking, and we get some errors here. If we look at this error, we get a similar error. Cart implicitly has an any type. So again, this means that TypeScript does not have enough information to figure out the type of cart automatically. So we have to set the type manually. We might try to add the type after cart, like this. However, this is not how we add a type to this code. Because remember, this code is actually a shortcut for this code. This is called the destructuring shortcut. So this whole thing is the parameter. So we need to add the type here after the parameter. So this code is a shortcut for props, which is an object. To tell TypeScript that this is an object, here we're going to type curly brackets. And then inside here, we can also tell TypeScript what properties are in this object. So in this object, we have a cart property. So in the type, we're also going to add a cart property. And remember that the cart is an array like this. So we're also going to tell TypeScript that this cart is an array using colon and square bracket semicolon. So again, this code tells TypeScript that this value is an object with a property called cart, and the cart is an array. Next, we can also tell TypeScript what is inside this array. In front of the array, we can type curly brackets to tell TypeScript that this is an array of objects. And inside this object, we can also tell TypeScript what properties each object has. So inside our cart array, each object has a product ID. And this product ID is a string. So we can tell that to TypeScript using colon string semicolon. And each object also has a quantity. And this is a number. So we can tell that to TypeScript using colon number semicolon. And each object has a delivery option ID, which is a string. So colon string semicolon. So using this code, we can tell TypeScript exactly what type of value this is. It's an object with a property called cart, and the cart is an array. And each value in the array has these three properties. So now TypeScript can actually look at the rest of our code and check if each value in the array has a quantity. And if we accidentally misspell quantity here, like this, TypeScript can use this type here to check if we made a mistake. So this helps us avoid a lot of mistakes when we're coding. So let's add that back and save. Next, we're going to organize this code a little bit. So putting a complex type directly in the code like this is a little hard to read. So we can actually take this type and then save it separately. Above this component, we can use type space and then give this a name. So here, this value is the props for the header component. So we'll name this header props. And we'll type equal, and we're going to move this type up here. So we'll select this type and cut, and then in here, we're going to paste. So this is called a type alias, and it works just like a variable, but for types. So we can save a type in here, and then we can use this type later in our code. For example, down here, we can just use this type, header props, and it will substitute this type into our code, just like a variable. And now our code is much cleaner. So that's an intro to how to use TypeScript with React. We basically add types to React features like props. So now let's save, and we'll save these changes into Git. In the Git section, at the top, we'll use the message convert money utils and header to TypeScript and commit. Finally, we're going to learn how to use AI or artificial intelligence with React. After we learn React, we can use AI to help us write React code faster. The easiest way to get started with AI is to use GitHub Copilot, which is built into VS Code. Before we begin, AI tools are changing very quickly. If something in this section is not working, you can check the troubleshooting guide in the description. To set up GitHub Copilot, we're going to install the GitHub Copilot extension. So in the extension section, we need to make sure we have the GitHub Copilot extension installed. If it's not installed, we can search up here for GitHub Copilot and install this extension. Once we have that installed, we're going to click this Copilot icon up here. And we'll need to log in to our GitHub account. So we'll click Sign In, and then we need to log in to GitHub. If you don't have a GitHub account, you can create one by clicking here or going to github.com. So I'm going to log into my GitHub account. And then I'll click Continue. And I'll click here to go back to VS Code. Once we finish the setup, we can start using some features of AI. The first feature is autocomplete. So let's say that we're in the header, and we'll close this window for now. And let's scroll down to the HTML, and we're going to go to the right section. Let's say that inside the header, we want to add a link to a login page. So here, we can just start typing in this code, and the AI will give us some autocomplete suggestions. To accept these suggestions, we can press Tab. So this creates a new link and some text. And I'll press Enter, and it gives another suggestion. So I press Tab, and this creates the closing tag for the link. So you notice that the autocomplete is very smart because the AI can read and understand the rest of our code. And it can suggest code that follows the same patterns as the rest of our code. For example, here it creates a link element and it gave it a class name that is similar to the other class names. However, when using AI, we may need to go in and modify things to make sure we get exactly what we want. So here, the AI created a link to the home page, but what we actually want is a link to a login page. So I can click here and modify the URL path to /login. And I can also change the text to login. And I'll change this to login. And I don't really have an icon for the login page, so we can delete it. And I'll change this to login. So using AI, I'm able to write this code a lot faster. Another feature of AI is we can give the AI instructions. For example, let's remove this code for now. And we can click this Copilot icon, and it will open this chat window. And inside here, we can just tell the AI what we want to do. For example, in here, we can say, in the header, add a link to the login page. And make sure in this dropdown, you have agent or edit selected. And we'll press enter. And the AI will make edits to our code. So here, you can see that it added a login link like before. So we can press keep to keep these changes or undo if we don't like these changes. So this looks good to me. So I'm going to press keep. And again, I'll go in here and modify it a bit. So here, it added the login link after the orders link, but I want to put this before the orders. So I can just select this code and cut, and at the top, paste that code. So as you can see, by using AI, we can write React code faster. But you'll notice that we still need to understand the code to check if it's what we want and to modify the code if we need to. So it's important to learn how to code first, and then we can use AI to help us code faster. So now I'll go into the Git section, and I'm actually going to undo these changes because this was just an example. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned some of the updates in the new version of React. We learned how to set up the React compiler to automatically optimize our React code. We set up a new TypeScript React project using Create Vite. We did an intro to TypeScript and learned basic features like type checking and type inference. We converted our e-commerce project to TypeScript. We learned how to use TypeScript with React. And we learned how to use AI with React to help us write code faster. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. Good job on finishing this React tutorial. If you want to continue learning with me, you can check out the premium version of this course where I will be adding extra lessons and projects in the future. Currently, the premium version has 11 lessons, but I'll be adding more lessons in the future. You can also check out the membership for extra content on AI and backend. As the next step after learning React, I recommend moving to the backend and learning the command line and Node.js. I'll be putting my work in progress on these technologies inside the membership first, so be on the lookout for that. Thanks so much for watching and taking this course with me, and I'll see you in the next one.